Perfect. Well, today we are recording the Freedom Hub Working Group. We're at the October 23rd session. We've got a lot of good fun and games in store for today. Just as you'll see, here's a little housekeeping. Let me open this up properly. All right. So this is the link. It's case sensitive to register to be on these on an ongoing basis. And once you're in there, ideally, you'll be getting notices regularly thereafter. We do a notification on Mondays that explains who was on the past week and who's coming up in the forthcoming week. And then we'll have a link there for you to be able to check that out. And then if you're inclined to see any of the past videos, we have a very expansive channel of them. And I'll show you here real quickly, but you can see there's an awful lot of them. They go back quite a ways, and there's some exceedingly good ones on here, as you'll discover. So we certainly would encourage you to come and take a look at this. And then it's also being sponsored by your Freedom Hub. And so where that is kind of a way to follow through on the idea of this individualized freedom, both when it comes to your health and for your monies. So here's a program that's a disruptor in the healthcare industry. And here's that same program, but geared to the doctors that like to participate as well. So you'll certainly want to check that out, yourfreedomhub.com. Now today we have a really interesting guest today. So we're going to do a little bit of an explanation here as to who this is. And then we're going to let Yuri take over. So Charles, I'm going to tap you to do a little bio here for us.
For sure, Jeff, and thank you, and welcome, Professor Maltsev. So I first saw Yuri at the Mises Institute online presence discussing desocialization. And Jeff, Yuri also keynoted the Free Market Medical Association conference a year ago or so. So he definitely is in tune with healthcare, as several folks on this call also are involved with. Since fleeing Russia after advising Gorbachev in the 80s on perestroika, he's had a pretty good new life here in the US, as you can see there on the screen. He did work at the U.S. Institute of Peace for a while, helping Congress and others deal with international affairs. He has testified before Congress, and he's appeared on CNN and PBS. And for many, many years now, he has been an economics professor at Carthage College, focusing in part on transitional economies. And that is pretty much what he'll discuss today, and maybe he'll surprise us on other slides he'll show. We are an open forum. Whatever the guest wants to talk about, that's fine. But really, the idea was to talk about his effort desocializing Russia with Gorbachev back then, and his efforts desocializing the rest of the world since. And that is our guest today, Jeff.
Very good. All right, I'm going to stop my sharing. And now, Yuri, if you want to start sharing from your end.
Oh, how can I do that?
You should just be able to open that little control panel and hit that share button, because I've opened it up for you to be able to do so.
All right. Is it working?
There it goes. Yep, there we are.
And you can see me now? You can see
Yes.
this?
Yep.
Perfect. Very good. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for this nice eulogy that you said. I'm not such a monster that I'm working for CNN and NPR. And I was not the economic advisor for Mr. Gorbachev. I was an advisor. I wouldn't take the blame for destructing 11 time zones. And and what I want to talk about that the only lesson of history, it looks like that it does not teach anybody anything. And we have right now a new kind of, I would say, even the bumper crop of new socialists here in the United States. And to tell the truth, I defected to the United States in 1989, and I'm too old to defect again. This kind of socialism is haunting me. And then what can I say about it? Well, socialism was the kind of the true so-called socialism. Both international socialism and national socialism. The founder of both was Karl Marx. Oh, this is my picture with Hans Hermann Hoppe, a great Austrian economist. So Marx I like this picture because he doesn't have this beard on him, beard. And so we'll talk about socialism as public slavery, because that's what it is. Many people think that socialism is kind of like an alternative to capitalism. It is not. A great Austrian economist, Ludwig von Mises, he used to say that the choice between a glass of milk and a glass of potassium cyanide is not a choice between two beverages. It is a choice between life and death. And that's what socialism is. Socialism is the end of human civilization. It's the end of people living as dignified human beings. It is another form of slavery, and it's even worse than private slavery. Private slavery, as disgusting as it is, but not so many slaves were killed, because killing a slave would reduce the wealth of the slave owner. Under socialism, millions, tens of millions of people were murdered, were slaughtered, because to prove that that socialism works. Today, New York Times or Washington Post and other fake news publications and TV stations, they are promoting socialism. That was, for example, an article, the strangest article I've read in my life, that why women had better sex under socialism. That's published in the New York Times. How do they know that? Well, they sent graduate students from University of Pennsylvania together with their so-called research leader. I think her name is Sandra Godsby. She is the chairwoman of Russian studies in the University of Pennsylvania, to ask 75 years old babushkas whether they had sex better under socialism or they have better sex today. And sure enough, they remember that the sex was much better when they were 20 years old rather than when they were 75. And this kind of idiocy is going on through all and through most of today's publications, especially through the CNN, NPR, PBS, Washington Post. In Washington Post, a series of articles. It's time to give socialism a try. Socialists of all kinds murdered about 200 million people just in the course of the 20th century. There is a great American demographer, his name is Rudy Rummel, and Rudolph Rummel, he died 2 years ago. He's the University of Hawaii, where he was the chairman of the department, still is keeping up his website called democide.org. Democide, that means murdering of peoples. And you can open that and have a look, because his computation of how many people were murdered by their own government, just really stunning, really stunning. And also he has a great book called Death by Government, the deadliest of disease. And so these are the kind of the issues. Why they kill? Why they kill? Because socialism, as you sure know, does not have any incentives to do anything. It is equality of results. It's not equality for a starting line. It's equality for finishing line. And at the finishing line, everybody ends up at the same time. That means that you have the same stuff no matter what you do. You live in this little government-owned apartment. You're getting unbelievably murderous health care. You don't have any rights anywhere. Then you become a public slave. And as a slave, you are dispensable. How to make you work? Then the slave owners, the socialist leaders, they have only one tool in their toolbox, which is violence, which is mass murder. So according to John Locke, a person has a property in himself and in his labor. So if you do not own yourself, somebody else owns you. And in case of socialist governments, they would own the people. And they cannot reap rewards of their labor, because rewards of their labor, if any, would be taken away by government. So this is what Marxism is. And again, Marxist ideas, and you can see that in today's United States. Most important is that this is a story of conflict, that socialists today, like socialists 150 years ago, were trying to pit everybody against everybody else on all kinds of grounds, on the ground of skin pigmentation, on the ground of gender, on the ground of worker or employer, on the grounds of husband and wife. The major kind of thing is to destroy the institutions of free society, like family, for example. We right now witness an enormous attack on family. Marx, he wrote, what is family in bourgeois society? It is a legalized prostitution and nothing else. In a family, according to Marx and Lenin, husband would be oppressor and wife and children would be oppressed. The same applies to churches. Churches, mosques, and synagogues, all of them were considered to be dispensers of opium for the people by Karl Marx. Marx believed that religion is opium for the people and should be abolished. And why it should be abolished? Because if you are a truly religious person, you cannot believe in Marx or Lenin or Stalin or Bernie Sanders or Ocasio-Cortez or anyone else like that, because you have a master, another master. So that's the kind of the repetition of what we saw in all socialist countries. So what if we will, another kind of tool is climate science. Climate science, I would say it is like a watermelon. It's green only outside, inside it's red. It's all socialism, all Marxist-Leninism. If you will visit a website of National Atmospheric and Oceanographic Administration of the United States, called NOAA.gov, you will see that according to the United States government, temperatures really went up. But how much up? Since 1821, the average temperature of our planet increased by 0.8 degrees centigrade. So from one hand, I don't see it as a problem because everyday temperature would fluctuate tens of times more than this. From another hand, I kind of question all this farrago in the sense that what does it mean average temperature of our planet in 1821? Who would take that temperature? And the answer is that Royal Navy did. Royal Navy put 3 thermometers in Greenwich, in Aden, and in Singapore, which were kind of the major naval stations of the British Empire. Later, they put another one in Simonstown, South Africa. And so that's what is that? It's an average measurements over there out of 3 thermometers and then 4. So even if today's kind of measurements are much better, then how about the base measurement? Who can know, we can find out how scientific was the measurement done by Royal Navy in 1821, where nobody was cared too much about climate change or things like that. So, and because of that, we need to do everything what the socialists desire. And they desire to stop people eating beef and other meat. They want you to stop flying, driving, living in warmth. It's just amazing what people can sell without any scientific proof or foundations of it. So then, I just want to go to. many of my colleagues would not understand the difference between communism and socialism. Not many people actually. And some people would say communism is actually bad. Fascism and communism are not good. It's socialism what is good, and socialism was never tried. No, I would respond to this that actually communism was not tried. It was never tried. There is no such thing. Communism, according to Karl Marx, is a new society. The new society, and this new society is based on communist utopia. And this communist utopia would be that there will be no classes anymore. People would be free to choose how they labor and can be creative, productive. There will be wonderful people. The state itself would wither away. There will be no government. Why no government? Because people will be such angels that they would self-govern themselves. There will be no money. There will be people would work at their fullest potential, and they will consume as little as they possibly can. So that would be a real communist paradise. In communist society, Marx wrote, nobody has one exclusive sphere of activity, but each can become accomplished in any branch he wishes. To hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. So even Engels didn't believe much in this communist utopia, and he asked Marx, when does he think this communism would occur? And Marx said 400 or 500 years from now. So we're still a couple of hundred years away from this paradise. So it is slavery. That's what it is, when people are not free to choose what they want. Marx also was anti-Semite. He was anti-Semite to the point that he was credited by Adolf Hitler that he actually formed his views on socialism, formed his views on revolution, and even formed his views on Jews. So these are I just don't want to read it all because this is pretty gross kind of things that what Marx was thinking about Jews. His father, he was Jewish. His grandfather was a rabbi, but his father converted to Lutheran faith. And Marx was a militant atheist because he came up with his religion of socialism. So these are the kind of some things here. And Engels, they were claiming that revolution will be violent, because without violence, who would give their property? Who would become voluntarily become a slave? And that's why the today's followers of the same teaching are very much against Second Amendment. Just yesterday, I listened to a national public radio. I call it national propaganda radio. Long interview with Beto O'Rourke, and what he was saying that we should disarm people who has anything except handguns. That's very generous of him that we can keep handguns. Everything else should be surrendered to the government. It's following up of Lenin. Lenin was asked, what does he think about gun control? And Lenin answered, gun control is that one with a gun controls a lot without. That's his point, is that this is the source of revolutionary victory. So that, and sure enough, his first decree when he became the leader of the communist revolution was that people who would not surrender their guns should be shot on the spot. No trials, no judges, no lawyers, no attorneys, just on the spot. So Lenin was a follower of Marx, another mass murderer. Marx didn't kill anyone because he didn't have a chance. If he would, I think he would be one of the greatest serial political killers in history. Under Lenin's watch, 18 million people were put to death. So the idea that Lenin was good and Stalin was bad is completely rotten. Both of them are one of the most awful mass murderers. Trotsky, that's another one. Today, many people, very many socialists today are followers of Leo Trotsky, who was a mass murderer number one, I think. He didn't have a chance to kill so many people because he was exiled by Stalin, and he was murdered by Stalin in Mexico in 1940. There is an interesting on Netflix right now, interesting series made in Russia under his name, Trotsky, about Trotsky, which is more or less, I would say, more or less, I think, is factual, and it's not a documentary, but the history of that awful human being is depicted there very well. And Stalin, that's a mega murderer, over 40 million victims in the Soviet Union and elsewhere. So Stalin, definitely, he overdid other mass murderers, other socialist mass murderers like Hitler, like Mussolini, like Lenin, Mao Zedong did more even. But as a percentage of people killed, definitely Stalin is a champion because China is a big country population-wise. Who said that, you think? We are socialists. We are enemies of today's capitalistic economic system for the exploitation of the economically weak, with its unfair salaries, with its unseemly evaluation of a human being according to wealth and property instead of responsibility and performance. And we are all determined to destroy this system under all conditions. And I'm sometimes asking students, who do you think said that? And they would say, maybe Bernie Sanders said that, or maybe Fidel Castro said that. But no, that was Adolf Hitler said that. That's his famous Nuremberg speech of 1930. So that's another socialist and another, however, his version of socialism was that we need socialism for the Aryan people only, for the Nordic people. Everybody else should serve this socialist gods who will have this wonderful society of wealth, prosperity, and freedom. That's what his point. Well, freedom in the sense that they would be free to kill others. Hitler, he believed in Bolshevism. You can see there is more than binds us to Bolshevism, that means to Soviet communism, than separates us from it. There is above all genuine revolutionary feeling, which is alive everywhere in Russia, except where there are Jewish Marxists. I have always made allowance for this circumstance and given orders that former communists are to be admitted to the party at once, so they don't need any probation period, which would be a year for everybody else. The bourgeois social democrat and the trade union boss will never make a national socialist, but the communists always will. And sure enough, they did. So this is another socialist Marxist that I should become a socialist ultra, he said. Indeed, a communist. I carried about a medallion with Marx head on it in my pocket. I think I regarded it as sort of talisman. And Marx had a profound critical intelligence, was in some sense even a prophet. And this is Benito Mussolini with his Marxist talisman. So there's more mass murderers. Mao Zedong, who was a poet in the beginning of his life. Ho Chi Minh, another poet and artist. Then Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, that's the murderers of Cuba. Che Guevara, he was trigger-happy guy. He murdered 2,900 people himself. He liked to kill. So all of these ones, they tell us that we should be vigilant because this is a system of almost no return. Because what they do in the very beginning, they kill the best people right away. The good workers, good engineers, scientists, all kind of artists would be slaughtered first. From Lenin's point, we need to do that just to make them listen. So if you don't kill, nobody listens to you. If you kill, then attention span goes up. So I think that maybe we will switch to a discussion, discuss this stuff, because I don't want to kind of deliver a full-blown lecture on this. So your comments and questions would be very helpful.
Yuri, that was very, very good. And I'm going to ask everyone that has questions to use that little raise your hand icon that you'll see in your control panel. I see some hands up already. But the one I would ask of you, because you probably have a very good perspective on this, is, you know, here everybody recognizes, and I mean, it doesn't take too much history studying to figure out that the bulk of all of what went on in these people were pretty bad. Why does everybody become enamored of it over and over and over again? They never seem to learn from even the most basic of realities of history. Forget about something complex and nuanced. I mean, this is pretty cut and dry.
Yes, I think it's kind of like part of political Stockholm syndrome. You know, in Stockholm was a hijacking of a plane, and when the Swedish SEALs wanted to liberate these people, the hostages. Most of the hostages were on the side of hijackers, because these are dominating figures. They are telling you what you want to hear, and then you are scared as well. And when you are scared this much, then people are losing their mind in reality. Look, I mean, Stalin murdered anywhere from 43 to 61 million people, and nobody tried to kill him. The same happened with Mao Zedong. Looks like the CIA wanted to kill Fidel Castro, but that's about it. So these mass murderers, they had almost full control over the people. And look in today's United States, look at Antifa, look at the people who are gathered at these meetings with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders. They're fanatics.
Yeah, there you go. David, I see you've got your hand up.
Hi, Yuri. This is David Pratt-Demarest with Roads to Freedom Foundation.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
And it's a shame that we don't have time to hear some of your fascinating stories, but I have a question for you about public goods and the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So from my perception, governments are by far the worst stewards of the environment. And why do I think that? The problem is ownership,
Exactly.
or lack thereof. Public goods really aren't owned by anyone. So the problem is there's no motivation of ownership to take care of the environment. And within the government, the motivation of cronyism far exceeds any do-good motivation to take care of public goods. So my question for you is, what are your thoughts on private ownership of what today we call public goods, like waterways and unclaimed land and so on? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that the private ownership definitely, it's very good for environment. It's very good for all citizens who would enjoy the higher environmental quality. I had a dubious pleasure of working with Boris Yeltsin, who later became president of Russia. And he called socialist country environmental Auschwitz. And that was environment, because if property rights are not assigned, so there are no stewards at all. So anyone can do anything to our environment. And if today you will look at the rich countries like United States, like say Switzerland, like Nordic countries, Germany, you will see that these countries, they have a pretty good environment, because relatively, I mean, I'm saying definitely our federal government is humongous, it's huge. But from another hand, relatively, we still have less government than many other countries, which has huge governments like China and very poor environment. what I think about privatization. Yes, of course, because the theory of public good is based on the assumption that the market is failing, that so-called the market failure occurs when market does not produce enough of what we need. And this is ridiculous. Why we should have, say, National Public Radio or PBS or public broadcasting system? The idea is that to give voice to those who are not heard, and this is ridiculous. This left-wing neo-socialist ideas are generated by private sector for free, and we are paying our taxes to keep the so-called public good of national public broadcasting alive, and they don't have ratings, they're not market players. So CNN is lying to us, at least at their own expense. Why these guys would lie us in this, with the waterways and everything else? Yes, of course, if you will look at, say, state of Nevada, state of Idaho, which are mostly federal lands, and bureaus of land management are doing pretty poor job. If you will go to, say, Nevada, you will see a lot of displaced earth. You see, I mean, because of the mineral rights would not be rights, but would be a lease or grazing. The pastures will be overgrazed because they belong to the government and nobody takes care of them. Yes, definitely we should. There is no justification that 89% of the state of Nevada is owned by the federal government. So I completely agree. Or if you look at Canada, the crown lands, I mean, are they in a good shape? No, they're in the worst shape when there is not a master. You don't see much of environmental damage or overall because Canada is just a huge place, so there's not enough pollution to spoil everything. So these are the kind of the issues. Walter Block, an Austrian school economist, he is a great specialist how to privatize almost everything. And I think that we should listen to him and we should try, especially things like NPR or PBS, they can be privatized easily. And it's just amazing that American taxpayers are paying for something which is insulting and promotes socialism left and right.
Yeah, and everybody just doesn't really care, so it's so meaningless in the overall scope of things, they just ignore it. So the few people that really like it and want it, they get to have it. Kishore, I see your hand up.
Right. So my question is about the strange phenomena of capitalist billionaires like Mark Benioff acting and behaving like socialists. I mean, how do you explain this weird thing where this guy is riding roughshod over the entire city of San Francisco to impose his socialist will? I mean, he's a capitalist.
Right. That's an interesting thing because I heard from Milton Friedman, for example, that he was all the time amazed why so many wealthy Jewish people are for socialism when everything they progressed about was because of capitalism. It's, I think, some kind of bended demand curve for socialism. The richer you are, the more you want socialism. Maybe that's some kind of a hidden guilt that these people, or maybe they think that everybody should have the same as they have. But it is a phenomenon, very common phenomenon, that the richer people are, the more they want kind of socialism. They, on the good side, they probably don't understand what it is. They think that socialism is kind of like to sing or we shall overcome and to smoke pot together. But that's true. For example, during elections, if you would drive through Lake Forest, which is the richest town in the Midwest, you would see only socialist and democratic yard signs. If you Move from there next to it is a pretty poor place, Waukegan, and it's all Republican and libertarian. So it's very, very interesting. I think that your observation is absolutely correct. That the same people, the same happened in Russia. Before the revolution, a lot of these very rich people, a lot of Russian millionaires, were bankrolling this so-called Social Democratic Party, which later became Communist Party. They were bankrolling Lenin. So that's amazingly enough, what Lenin did on the next day after he won this revolution, he sent Dzerzhinsky, his executioner, to go and eliminate all these donors because he didn't want to listen to them anymore, and they were useless as he got everything.
Charles, so you've got your hand up.
Great, thanks, Jeff. A couple questions, and don't know how much you went into it during your talk, Yuri, but some more detail about your advising of Gorbachev and perhaps Yeltsin, and what that transition was like. I mean, for those of us who were, I was in college in '88 and just starting my career around '89. From your side of the Cold War, what was it like to be part of that great transition out of that swamp, that tragic swamp you were part of? And then the other question is, if you have time, some of your transitional economic work on the ground around the world. What are some lessons you learned on the ground with some of those countries growing up?
Yes, well, the economic reforms initiated by Mr. Gorbachev, called perestroika or restructuring. He tried that only after he tried everything else and it didn't work. When he was elected in 1985 on the 23rd of April by 11 people elected by Politburo members, and he at first, his idea was socialism is good, people are bad. And so he declared wars on drinking and alcoholism and the war against on violations of labor discipline and on like that. So our first impression was that it's another Stalin in power. Then when it didn't work, then he was thinking of more reforms. And fortunately for all of us, he went to Canada and he befriended Soviet ambassador to Canada, Alexander Yakovlev. And Alexander Yakovlev, he was also Communist Party operator, but he spent the whole night sitting, talking, and drinking with Gorbachev. And Gorbachev next day, he invited him to come to Soviet Union and to be his deputy. So he was a person number 2. I wrote several articles about him. Alexander Yakovlev. He was an anti-communist, closet anti-communist, and he was really great. His idea of perestroika was that perestroika means restructuring. So his point was that we should restructure this empire into a pile of rubble. And that's what he was trying to do. Gorbachev himself, well, it was impossible. One of the leading, the economic advisor to Gorbachev once bended to me on one of these meetings and he said, Yuri, do you think there is anything behind this birthmark? And I said, not much. And he said, yeah, I agree. Because Gorbachev, for example, he was saying things like central planning works. The problem is that we never had a good plan or something else as stupid as that. The same Abel Aganbegyan, his chief economic advisor. We called him the biggest economist in the world. He was very, very big. He was maybe 400 pounds for sure. And what he suggested, he said, we should build a Swedish model. So he was like Bernie Sanders. We should build a Swedish model. And Gorbachev said, Abel, where you would get the Swedes? And that was the funniest thing I've heard from Mr. Gorbachev. Yesterday, I was in Washington, D.C., and I met my old friend, Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader, we are on the same program. So Ralph was promoting this kind of socialism, Swedish, Danish, or whatever. But that's not socialism, because what is socialism? Socialism is abolition of private property. And if you will look at Denmark or other Nordic countries, they all have well-established property rights, well-established legal protection, rule of law. In the rule of law index, Denmark is actually #1. In the United States is actually #20. So these are kind of the issues that I think we should all the time keep in mind, that as much as you would, as these rich people would promote socialism, the sooner they would end up with their own end, because it's still based on class. Look, I mean, all this circus, democratic presidential circus, they're all in chorus. They all are promoting class war. They hate the rich. Even the rich are saying we should soak the rich. So this is amazing.
And then the second part, Yuri, some of your transitional economic work on the ground. Have you been to a few countries where you've seen the transition from kleptocracy and socialism to something more capitalist?
Oh yes, of course. That would be when Soviet Union collapsed on the glorious night of 24th of December 1991. Then all these 15 new republics emerged. Well, how did it collapse? It collapsed because Boris Yeltsin declared independence of Russia from Soviet Union. And if you will look at the map of Soviet Union, then that was the end of Soviet Union. It would be like continental US declare independence from US, and only, I don't know, only Guam and Puerto Rico and Marshall Islands would try to stick together. So that was the end of Soviet Union, and each country went from this socialist slavery in search of freedom in their own way. And only that countries which embraced freedom, economic freedom, then they also enjoyed political freedom, cultural freedom. And those countries would be Estonia, for example. In Estonia today, gross domestic product is over $34,000 per person. In Russia, it's about $8,000. In Ukraine, $6,000. In Kazakhstan actually it's 18,000, but not because of freedom, because they are selling all their natural resources, and they have a lot of uranium and oil and everything else. So it is. It looks like the more radical would be reform, then the better it would be. And the reforms should be done in one fell swoop. That's what Poland example was. Example of Slovenia, another former socialist country. I just was this summer I spent some time in Mongolia and in China and in Korea, and I would say that definitely Mongolia is trying to get out of it, and they have some successes. Amazingly enough, they have a new president whose slogan is "Let's make Mongolia great again." That's a very unusual slogan, and so they have a cult of Genghis Khan right now. But what are the ingredients of success? Private property and rule of law. These are the most amazing things. As James Madison was saying, that property rights are the mother of all rights. And if you will look, really, no other human rights are possible without property rights. So these are the countries. I met with prime ministers of Estonia, Latvia, a president of Lithuania. These countries are doing, all of them are doing very well, or at least much better, because they went faster and they went farther than, say, Russia or the historic place called Moldova or countries of the Caucasus.
It's very good. You know, it's a separate little take. You know, look at what's happening with Brexit right now, where the UK is trying to split away from the EU. And it's a bold stroke, but they didn't do it abruptly. You know, they've allowed it to become bogged down. And
Right.
Of course, they know that if they pull away, that's going to be the thread that unravels that EU sweater. So they don't want them to go. What do you think is ultimately going to happen there?
Well, Margaret Thatcher, she made some comments. We had in Russia, they had, and Gorbachev came up with a 500 days plan. And she was asked, what does she think, 500 days? And she said, it will be like we in Britain would decide to switch from left-hand driving to the right side and decide to do that in 500 days, gradually. And like the first 100 days, only big lorries will go on the right. And then other types of transportation would be gradually transiting to this right thing. And that's, I think, a very good observation. President of Poland, first president of Poland, Lech Walesa, he made another kind of comparison. His point was that if you buy these puppies, you know, some puppies, they would have their tail cut, and you will make it as a transition, cutting like a centimeter each day. That probably would make this puppy crazy. So this I think are the issues which are very important. With Brexit, yes, it is kind of sometimes you think that cultural revolution already happened in the United Kingdom and United States, and people are so brainwashed that they are not able to see where is liberty, where it's not. And then Boris Johnson, I think he is doing all his best, and he has a great cabinet. But look what the enemies of freedom are doing. They just stalling everything. Besides that, it's also egos of people. You will look at people like Mitch Romney or Paul Ryan, even, or anyone else. The people think that they are kind of navels of the world, and they know better than others. And then the Brexit, what will happen? Nobody knows what will happen because now it looks like they extended this exit time. The Donald Tusk, former president of Poland and now chairman of the European communities, they want to extend it, so maybe it will be going on and on and on. That's there is a funny caricature I think I saw in a French paper that the British knights and the king would come to Brussels 500 years from now and knock on the gates. Everything will look like it looked 500 years ago, but in 500 years ahead, everything will revert with all this global warming thing to the times with no electricity, and he will knock at the door, at the gates of Brussels, trying to get in, and they would not let him in. And nobody knew where this tradition came from. Well, it definitely came from Brexit, and so that's that nobody can predict even what will happen, because again, the enemies of freedom. I mean, if you will look at another socialist, he is to the left of Bernie Sanders. He is Mr. Corbyn, the leader of Labour Party, and if he, God forbid, would become prime minister, then I don't know what will happen. Have a first socialist monarchy in the world.
Interesting perspective. Kishore, I think you have your hand again.
Yeah. So my question is about this comment you made about Gorbachev. He was a very intelligent man, well-meaning man, but then he made this harebrained comment that central planning didn't work because we didn't have good plans. So my question is about, how do you explain these cognitive issues that intelligent people make highly foolish comments, and
Well,
sometimes people who don't seem to be intelligent make very wise comments. Like Donald Trump is considered to be foolish, but I would think that he's doing very wise things. I mean, his talk is foolish, but his action is wise for the most part.
that's
So
well.
how do you explain this psychological aspect of, let's say, Gorbachev making comments that you wouldn't expect him to make?
That's right. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't even think that Mr. Trump is making foolish. He kind of makes funny comments. I think. I'm reading his tweets all the time. my favorite tweet of Mr. Trump is the first one about Kim Jong-un. Later, they kind of became almost friends, but before that, he wrote, Kim Jong-un calls me old. I don't call him fat or stupid because I want to be his friend. I think this is just amazing what the president of the United States would write. But Mr. Gorbachev, he all the time would talk about socialist choice. He all the time would say that socialism is superior. And nobody could understand why. And how does he come up with this? Because why Soviet Union collapsed? Why socialism collapsed worldwide? Because it can be based only on violence, on mass murder. And Gorbachev, he removed violence from the system, which was based and glued only on violence. I will maybe end up with a joke that I heard in Moscow at that time. And the joke was that James Bond, he retired from Her Majesty's Secret Service, and he was immediately drafted by the CIA as a subcontractor. And they sent him to Moscow and asked him that James, look what this perestroika, what are these Gorbachev's reforms are all about. And James, with a little notebook, he goes to a bakery and writes there in his notebook, no bread. He goes to a butcher shop and writes there, no meat. He goes to a shoe store and writes there, no shoes. And there is a KGB officer looking over his shoulder, and he said, a year ago, you would be shot for doing that. And James is writing there, no bullets. And that's exactly what ended the USSR.
That's really very good. We are at the end of our meeting here today, unfortunately, and that was really great. I'd love to have gotten into some more anecdotal stories too. So Yuri, that was really good. I appreciate you spending some great time with us, and we'll connect again. And everyone's encouraged to follow up on his materials and look for this video and share this with a variety of people because they'll all get a good kick out of it too. Charles, before we dart out of here today, why don't you give us a quick rundown on what's coming up next?
For sure. And Professor Maltsev, that was fantastic. And
Thank you.
it's really amazing to hear your firsthand account of that end of the Cold War. Just amazing. And your comments on the current markets. So coming up next week, we do have Richard Ebeling from Clemson. And he is around the internet frequently. Most libertarians know him. He's economics
already
professor.
in Citadel. He is teaching right now in Citadel.
Yes, Citadel. Thank you, Yuri. Not Clemson. Citadel in Charleston. And he is going to talk about the effort to end the Fed, which seems to have petered out. It had a lot of legs with the Ron Paul campaign. So he's going to try to fire us back up and try to rout out that den of vipers, as President Andrew Jackson called them back in the 1820s. In 2 weeks, we'll have Hesham al-Maliki from Muslims for Liberty to show how liberty is an ideology inherent in all humans, regardless of religion and ethnicity and background. And in 3 weeks, we'll have Bob Chittister from PBS talking about his Free to Choose series that he produced in 1980 with Milton Friedman, which many credit for helping Ronald Reagan get elected. And finally, a month from now, we'll have the conservative organization helping out mainly Republicans nationwide in the state legislatures. It's called the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC. And Skip Estes will talk about how they're pushing for free market reforms on the states. So that is our preview, Jeff.
Fantastic. It's going to be an exciting one. So again, remember the videos are available, and this one will be posted here as well within several days. So you'll be able to come to the site here. Again, the link for that, just to show you again, is this bit.ly WFH Freedom Hub Working Group channel, all the capital letters there. And remember also, we've got our sponsorship with yourfreedomhub.com, so take a peek at that. And other than that, I want to thank you for being here today, and we will definitely reconvene in a week.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed your conference.
Thank you, Yuri. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks all.